Hey, it's TDA, and this is a guide to master the mid and late game in Manor Lords. This guide picks up after my first guide that covers the early game and assumes you have your basic food and fuel production already going and a basic economy and defenses set up about 1 year into the game. By the way, if you're wondering how to specialize your village and which developments to pick up, you can check out my development analysis guide where I talk about which of these developments I think are generally stronger than others. Now, don't worry if you just want to pick something that looks fun, all the options are viable, I just think some of them are stronger than others. Now let me start out with one thing you shouldn't be doing, and that is increasing your attacks through your types. This is going to give you some influence and coins, however it's not going to give you a decent amount until you have a much larger village, so for now just leave these at 0%. The first thing that you should be doing is setting up a trading post. This is going to be the main source of your income, so your regional wealth, and it works by setting up trades. So for example, over here you can see I have a lot of planks, so I can establish the trade route. This is going to cost me a little bit of wealth in order to do so, and after that I can say, well, okay, let's export the planks. I want to keep at least, let's say, 20. There we go, 20. And now every time a trader comes by, it will sell off any surplus planks I have until we reach the surplus of 20. So basically it's going to sell 58 planks at a rate of 2 wealth per plank. So that's going to give me a nice little income. Now obviously we want to transform into selling more expensive stuff, especially the crafting materials, commodities and things like that are going to sell really well. So that is going to be our next focus. I also recommend covering some basics, so setting up a forester so you can start replenishing some of those trees you're cutting down, as well as setting up another hitching post and potentially even upgrading it to a small stable to make sure you have at least 2 oxen dedicated to just traveling around and making sure you can get those logs to wherever they need to go. Now you will also have noticed that your level 2 plots actually need a lot more access to different items. So for example, you're going to need to build a tavern, you're going to need to upgrade your church, and we're going to need to supply different types of clothing as well as food. Now all of this is going to have to be done alongside upgrading our actual economy, so there's a lot of balancing to do here. Now an easy way to get your food variety up and running is placing some vegetable gardens as well as chicken coops in the plots that you already have. However, remember that you should be careful about spending all your money because you're going to need these other things as well. So make sure that before you start upgrading you always have a little bit of money left. Also, if you want to be efficient during the winter, you should really make sure that your people are actually at work. Because, for example, the forager over here is not going to be able to collect any berries during the winter, so there's no point in assigning any people to that. Similarly, the farm, if there's no one working the farm in the winter, it doesn't make sense to have a lot of people at the farmhouse. Instead, you might assign those people to, for example, the mining pit or the stonecutter camp in order to make sure that you actually get some of those resources during the winter, and then you can reassign them back to your farms of foragers during the spring. Another great way to utilize your people during the winter, because they can't work the fields, is putting them to work to actually build stuff. So for example, because I know I'm going to need a windmill during the spring to actually make use of all that wheat I'm going to be farming, I might as well construct a windmill during the winter as well as a communal oven. And of course, make sure you keep building some of these plots because you're going to want more people to move into your village. Pretty soon you're also going to get a message that the raiders are going to pay you a little visit pretty soon. Well, that's not going to be a problem because we are well prepared, and I'll show you exactly what to do in order to defend yourself. Now it's really easy to start doing too many things at the same time when your second year comes around. You will get more people in your village, but keep in mind that you should be dedicating some of those people to get you some additional food specifically. That's probably going to be the first thing that you're running low on, especially after your first winter. So make sure you gather all those berries that are growing, maybe hunt some more animals and things like that. Unless, of course, you are sowing some fields, because that's also going to get you a lot of food in the long run. However, you do need to survive those first few months until that food is actually ready. So make sure you don't underestimate how much is going to go into that. Also, your rival might start claiming zones around the map. Don't worry about that, there's not really anything you can do about it at this point, but we will be, of course, pushing back pretty soon. If you start allocating a lot of people to specific buildings, then your actual economy might grind to a halt because things are no longer being transported. In order to kind of accommodate that, you can assign people, for example, to the granary to make sure that all that food you're producing is actually being stored, or you can dedicate people specifically to, say, the hitching post, and that will dedicate them to transportation only. Now, again, this is kind of a balancing act with what you want to do. For example, early in the summer, you want to make sure you are gathering all of those berries. As soon as you depleted most of those, you could move them, those people over to the farmhouse to start harvesting your wheat. And then once all of that is harvested, you could assign them to, say, your windmill and your communal oven in order to actually start baking that bread. Just an example of a production chain, but you do need to kind of move people around all the time if you want to be efficient. Once you hit around 20 people in your village, you can start thinking about expanding your production a little bit. And I think an easy place to start is actually making a joiner's workshop. This is going to allow you to create wooden parts from planks, which is a pretty easy way to just get some random production going. But you're also going to be able to produce your own shields, so you're going to need those to basically make your own defenses a little bit easier and more affordable as well. And of course, any shields you don't need, you can sell off. This is also a great moment to start investing in upgrading some of your existing buildings. For example, you can upgrade your storehouse so it fits a lot more stuff. Same thing holds for the granary, and you can actually upgrade the forager hut to start farming some herbs as well. Just a little bit of passive income out of buildings, or more utility out of buildings that you're using anyway. Once harvesting season comes around, assuming you're doing any harvesting, make sure you dedicate enough people to get all of that stuff off the fields as soon as you can, because you do have a limited time to do so. Going into the second winter, the raiders will be coming close. Now, you can't actually see the countdown anymore because there's a bug whenever you reload your game. It tends to disappear, the timer at least tends to disappear, but they're still coming. And what you want to do is, because you're actually making your shields yourself now, you can either make small or large shields depending on what you want to do. I'm actually switching from small shields, which I'm going to sell, to making some large shields for myself, because if you add some spears to that, you're going to have to order those in. You can set up your own troops. As you can see, these troops, the spear militia in particular, are, I think, quite useful. You need some shields to go along with that, but you also need some spears, so order those spears and you should have a pretty decent army ready to go when the actual raiders arrive. Now, unless you're making the weapons yourself, you're going to have to order them, of course, and these things are really expensive. So make sure you're not ordering too many at the same time, although you do need to keep an eye on how many you actually need. So if you have the money for them, by all means order a couple more, but make sure you're not overdoing it, because it's the surplus you're aiming for. So once the spears are delivered, they will be reordered once again, because your villagers will pick them up to start using them. So make sure you don't get stuck with a surplus of like 20 spears, because that's a lot of money early on in the game. Aside from arming your own villagers, another way to defend yourself is, of course, getting some mercenaries. Now, these mercenaries do cost some money, and you do actually need to pay a little bit of attention on where they're actually going to arrive, because these zones might be on the other side of the map. And if you order them too late, they will be arriving, but they will be on the other side of the map and not much help in defending your base, so make sure you take that into account. Now, you will need to keep paying them, but of course, if you lose some of these units, it's not going to be as much of a problem compared to losing your villagers, which actually harms your production as well. Once the enemy spawns, you'll find that it's a relatively small group that you should easily be able to defend against, but make sure you pause the game and start rallying your troops. Also make sure that you rally your troops somewhere in between where they're coming from and where your base is, because that will just make it easier to intercept them and make sure they don't damage your buildings or anything like that. Rallying your troops is really simple. Just click on the unit, click the rally button, and then click anywhere in an open space that's large enough to actually fit the unit in. So don't try to rally them in the middle of your city, for example, because that won't work. By default, the units will be standing in a clump, but you can have them move into any formation that you want by right-clicking and dragging. So if you want to have them all stand next to each other in a line, you can do that. But if you want, generally speaking, you do want to have them standing next to each other, mostly maybe in 2 or 3 lines thick, because that is a mix between having some backup for units that fall down, but also have as much units actually facing the enemy as possible. Keep in mind that every now and then the units might disappear off your screen because they can actually be hidden by the forests, but generally speaking they will move in a straight line between where they started and where your base is, so it's pretty easy to predict where they will be arriving. Now, if you can, try to catch the enemy in a V shape like this. This will allow you to attack them from 2 sides at the same time, which basically means you're surrounding them and will easily break their morale, because morale is a thing in this game, and as you can see, it is actually working. Their effectiveness is already going down, while my effectiveness is way higher than theirs. And the morale will easily break, and you will see them running off, and for some reason the enemy, your units actually don't decide to finish them off, which is a little bit strange. But at least you fought them off, you will gain some influence as a result. While you have your army up and about, you might as well get it to do something as well. And if you have any bandit camps in the map, this is a perfect time to start clearing those out. Preferably in a zone you intend to take as well. Once you take the bandit camp, you actually get this pop-up where you can either send resources to the nearest town, which is a nice thing to do, but not generally, I think, the best option, because you can also just add something to your treasury. Now, as you can see, this will give you personal money to spend, which you can then use to upgrade your retinue. You'll also need to deal with the corpses that the raiders left behind. In order to do that, you just build a corpse pit, you assign someone temporarily to that, and those people will drag the corpses into the corpse pit and make sure they're not left rotting in your village. Once you're done running around with your units, make sure you disband them so you can put them back to work, and they will do exactly that. You'll also actually need to disband your retinue before you can start adding men-at-arms to them, but that's a pretty nice thing to do because this means you'll have a nice small standing army with armaments to begin with. In the third year, you really want to start making sure you optimize the industry in your initial village. So what you want to do is basically focus on whatever industry you are working on. In my case, that's the farming over here. And as you can see, I have tons of flour, lots of bread and stuff like that going on, which I'm also selling off in the trading post because, of course, that's going to bring me in a lot of money. Now, you can do that in whatever way you want, but you do need to keep an eye on having enough food for your people. So make sure you have enough people assigned to the forager hut, to your farms, etc. So you're actually bringing in enough food to survive the winter. Kind of vital to have that. But other than that, just focus on 1 or 2 industries and build that up so you get a lot of money incoming. Also, make sure you start upgrading your plots so you have some passive money incoming as well. And generally speaking, just by adding in some chicken coops and things like that in your plots, you should have more than enough types of food incoming to satisfy all the tier 2 needs for that. But then we are left with the upgrade of the church, we need a tavern, and we need some more clothing. By far the easiest thing to do is just upgrade your church to a small stone church. You only need some planks, stone, and timber for that, along with some roof tiles. Now the roof tiles you can easily just produce by yourself by putting in a clay pit, a clay furnace, temporarily producing a couple of roof tiles, and you should be done with that really quickly. Now for the second level of clothing, you're either going to need a tailor, which is also going to require you to have some wool coming in, or you are going to need a cobbler, which is going to need leather. So that means you have either a lot of goats going on, or you need a rich wild animal deposit so you can do a lot of hunting. You also want to start looking at a second region. Now I actually got into a very strange situation over here where the enemy actually claimed all the regions around me, so I'm going to have to relocate to a secondary region a little bit outside of my comfort zone. What I do recommend is that you pick a region with a rich iron deposit if you don't already have one. For the very simple reason, this is going to make it a lot easier to make your own weapons. And if, like me, you actually don't have any bandits left on the map anymore because the enemy cleared them all out, you can also opt to do some tithing. This will actually turn food into influence because you're aiming for 1,000 influence to claim your first region. As you can see, I also decided to start taxing my people a little bit. A, because I have a lot of people now, so the taxing actually does something, but also because I had so much approval going on that I figured, well, might as well make my people a little less happy by actually getting some money in myself. Now the upside of that is that again allows you to spend that stuff on, for example, upgrading your retinue. Keep an eye on whatever you're producing. So for example, if you're going to be producing cloaks like I am, and you are producing your own yarn, because I can turn the wool into yarn, but you don't have dyes because I don't really have enough berries to go around to make dyes myself, make sure you go to your trading station and import that stuff. But again, make sure you take it easy and don't import 100 at the same time. And again, in order to satisfy the tavern supply demands, you're going to, well, ideally actually grow your own barley. It won't actually grow anywhere, so you do need to find a fertile enough spot where this stuff will actually grow, but importing it is really expensive. So if you can make it yourself, by all means do so. You're also going to need a malt house to actually transform that barley into malt, and there you're going to need, and yet another building, you're going to need to upgrade one of your plots to a brewery so that you can actually brew stuff. And then finally, you're going to need a tavern to actually supply your people with their beer. Now this is a lot of work to get that last amenity filled, so this is typically, again, the last one you're actually going to fill, but once you do, you can start upgrading your plots to level 3. Keep slowly growing your village and keep balancing your food production, your fuel production, and then if you have any spare left, industry and money production on top of that. in that order, because otherwise you're going to get into a death spiral. If you can't feed your people, if you can't keep them warm, you're going to get into a lot of trouble, so those should always be your first priorities. Ideally, if you have about 1 logger as well as 1 firewood maker for every 20 people in your village, that should be more than enough. It's actually a little bit of overkill, but if you keep that as a rule of thumb, you should always be safe. At this point, if your approval can handle it, don't hesitate to increase your taxes a little bit, because that will bring in more money and you're going to need that to settle other regions. If you've been doing everything I've said, you should see all your requirements being completed, and this will allow you to start upgrading a couple of your plots to level 3. Now don't overdo it, because this will actually add room for extra families as well. 2 extra families if you do it with the larger plots. So having more people in your village, not necessarily a bad thing, but just make sure you're ready for it. And it will also make sure you're going to lower your approval rating a little bit, because again, the requirements will increase. You can't meet all of those requirements instantly, so take care by upgrading your level 3 plots 1 by 1, so you don't get into another death spiral. As you keep upgrading your village and you already established a pretty decent industry, start focusing on getting some upgrades that will make your life easier, especially if you have a large village. In particular, I would recommend getting the charcoal burning. This is going to make fueling your city a lot easier. Or you could alternatively get orchards. The orchards do take a little while to actually get going, but once they do supply quite a bit of food. So this is a pretty easy way to get passive food coming into your village. So whichever one you're struggling with the most, fuel or food, these 2 things are a very nice upgrade to pick up to just make your life easier in general. Also keep in mind that if you don't add any more families to your village should be fairly stable. So if you are in a very good spot, make sure to save your game before you start adding like 5 more families to it, because that might just tune the balance in the wrong direction. So as long as you have enough food incoming for your current village and enough fuel incoming for your current village, there's pretty much no way to lose. However, there is one more thing that you need to keep an eye on, and that is the trading post, specifically the trading prices. So for example, I have been exporting bread at a pretty high rate. I actually stopped trading now for a moment because the price went all the way down to 1 gold per unit. Now this used to be a lot higher, and as you can see, it now actually went up to 2 because I temporarily stopped trading it. So just stockpile it for a little while before you start flooding the market once again. Also, don't forget, you can actually switch your production. So if, for example, your shields are no longer getting you a good price, you can just switch to producing, say, wooden parts and start selling those to get a pretty good deal on those. And then once those go down, you switch back, etc, etc. Once you get to 1,000 influence, you can start claiming another zone on the map for yourself. So make sure you do that. But again, pick a zone with as many rich deposits as you can. Ideally, other rich deposits than the ones you already have. Once you have at least 250 gold in your own treasury, you can use that to start a new settlers camp in a region that you claimed. Now you need at least 250, but if you spend a little bit more, you can actually give them a bit more resources as well, and that just speeds everything up. Now what you do in this village is basically just starting all over again. You can actually also upgrade that village with specific upgrades different from your original village as well, so you can specialize each region into its specific type of village. Now, of course, you are starting a new village if you do that, but you can actually leverage the one you already have by means of the pack station. The way this works is you set the other village, or the other zone, I should say, to trade with or to barter with. You're going to send something from your own region, from one region to the other one. So, for example, over here, I'm sending some of my excess bread to the other region, and then I'm asking for hides in return. Now, this is not going to be the most efficient way to get stuff from A to B, but this is a way to make sure your zones are interconnected and you don't need to reproduce everything you have in one zone in another zone as well. For example, if you have, let's say, iron production in one zone, you can send some of the weapons you make there to the other zone in order to arm your soldiers over there. And because you can now send food and building materials to that second village, it should go really, really fast. And again, just specialize it into something else than your original areas. For example, I'm focusing here on iron rather than on food production, so that you can send the materials you're producing here back to your main village as well. And then at this point, all there's left to do is start conquering the other zones in the map as well. However, these are likely going to be taken by your enemy, and you are going to need more influence in order to claim those. Now keep in mind that when you do that, the enemy is going to try and defend their territory, and as you can see, they will bring an army to do that. So make sure that you build up your own army first, unlike I've done in this example, and that you arm them properly as well. So not just arming them with shields and spears, for example, but you also need to give them helmets, armor, things like that. So that will just make them a lot more hardy, because honestly the enemy defense art is typically not that awesome. They do bring a lot of archers, which are typically fairly easy to kill, and they also will bring people like brigands and stuff like that that don't typically have a very high defense. So as long as your enemies are better equipped than theirs, you should be winning this battle. Just make sure you prepare properly. And that's it. Now you know everything you need to know in order to conquer the entire region in this stage of the game. Now, of course, there's going to be tons of update to this early access game. Half the technology tree isn't here. There's going to be, I think, a lot more types of industries and things like that as well. So make sure you subscribe to this channel if you want to see more updates later in the future as well. And I'll keep you posted on whatever changes might happen to the game. Alright guys, if you're still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.